This is episode 3, Planting the Seeds for Success. And again, my name is Craig. This is John Brandt, very successful entrepreneur, and we're picking his brain on what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur in today's day and age. And John has a wealth of wisdom. And today we're going to expand on mindset and beliefs as a startup entrepreneur or any experience level that you're at. So, John, with that, I'd like to just kind of pick your brain a little bit more on beliefs and believing in yourself as an entrepreneur when you're first starting out or when you're first hitting your first hurdle, your first real problem that you might get into.
Yeah. I guess starting with starting out anything, there's always a beginning, there's always a middle, and there's always an end. And we talked about nothing lasts forever, and nothing is negative forever. Nothing is positive forever. That's kind of the Stoic philosophy. But for me, one thing I realize as I'm getting older is really the concept of understanding that there are things I still don't know. You can look at me and go, okay, here's a guy who built and sold 4 companies. I'm on my 5th. Had some failures in the past. I think I'd learned some things, and ultimately it always starts again. For me, life is about learning. And I think the more success that you have, for me, and I think this is true with everyone, but the more success you have, the more you're called upon to deal with more difficult situations.
Sure.
It's not less. So when you look at somebody being successful, you go, oh man, they got everything in the world. They don't have to worry anymore. Well, I'm going to call bullshit on that one because that just doesn't exist. Matter of fact, sometimes you create more problems for yourself. The secret, however, is to really understand and welcome the problems. Because here's the most important thing, and I've probably said it in the first 2 episodes, but solving problems is where life has its meaning. And for me, that is, the ability to welcome problems. Once you welcome issues and problems, things become easier. So when you mentioned about starting out as an entrepreneur or starting out in any new job or whatever, it's all new, and it's always going to be new. That's what I'm saying. It's not like my wisdom and everything I've learned, I know everything. I'm humble enough to say that I don't know everything, and I'm always trying to learn, always trying to absorb. So to me, that's what, when we talk about the how you start thinking to create something, it really goes back to the same philosophy all the time. It's about really putting your mind to something. And I'll give a good example. I call it my Costa Rica story. So this is back in December of 2008. I just got through a tragedy. I lost my brother, who passed away a few months earlier, feeling kind of melancholy with my wife and her side of the family, away in Costa Rica with the kids, having a wonderful time, but having this ache inside me. At the same time, in the middle of my business, wanting to grow it, wanting to make it bigger. And I sat down with a book. And again, I don't remember who gave it to me. I always forget who gave me these great books. But it was called The Science of Getting Rich. And it was written it was written in 1902, I believe, by a guy, and you know the book.
Yeah.
It was written by a guy by the name of Wallace T. Wattles. And it was this belief system around, attracting things into your life. And I read the whole book. It was probably, 90 pages or so, and I read it within a few days. And I kind of started thinking about the concept, which was, put something in your mind and it will happen and it will come true and so forth. So I sat down and I was, pretty well into my business at that point, but still, going through the struggles of how I'm going to grow and where we're going. And I decided that I wanted to create an end goal. And the end goal for me was actually coming up with, what am I going to sell this company for?
Mm-hmm.
I never thought about it before, and it just kind of hit me. And I'm going to write a number down, and I'm going to really focus on that number, and I'm going to drive things to reflect that number. And I wrote December of 2008. I wrote down that I'm gonna sell the business in 5 years for this crazy number I wrote down. I felt like if I do this, this, and this, it may be achievable. Cut away to about 3 weeks later, I'm back in the wonderful state of New Jersey, outside after spending all the time in Costa Rica, 2 weeks. My phone rings, and all of a sudden, about 4 private equity firms start calling, and the phone's ringing off the wall. And I'm like, what did I just hit a tripwire or something? Why am I so popular all of a sudden?
Mm-hmm.
And talked to a few of them. One company stood out, kind of sold themselves better to me. It was Providence Equities who purchased my company. But they reached out to me and said to me, we're interested in possibly acquiring your company. We went through the whole thing, and we kind of settled on a number where we would be. And I went through the dance with them. We went through a 3-month process of due diligence and a path and so forth. And all of a sudden, Craig, I got cold feet. I got cold feet because I was selling my baby, which was National Health Career Association, NHA. And I worried that I was going to lose my baby, and what was I going to do next in my life? And I went through this process with them where I went through due diligence, and then one day I woke up and said, I don't want to do this deal. And I called my M&A guy, merger and acquisition guy, and said, Steve, I'm done. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to stay with the business, keep running it, and hopefully 5 years down the road, I'm going to get this number. And he said to me, what's the number you want? And I threw a number out to him, and he said, yeah, I guess you might want to wait on that one. Cut to about 2 weeks after I backed out of the deal. He called me and said, they want to talk to you. And I said, Steve, I really don't want to talk. I'm feeling great. I'm back in the business. I'm back really focused in the business, and I don't want to entertain another offer. I'm gonna set my sights on hitting my number when I get there in about 5 years. And he said, well, they're open to any number. Can I throw that number at them? And I said, throw it at them. And we got on the call, and they said they really want to talk to me. So we got on the call. I was ready to say, listen, guys, there's no negotiation. This is my number. I don't expect you to get there. And basically the guy told me to shut up. And he said, we're going to accept the number. And here I am in May of 2009, 6 months, after writing that number down. We ended up closing in June of that year at that number. So,
wow.
I didn't necessarily believe in this conceptual idea of putting something out there and it coming back to me. And this was proof to me that this does work. I've tried it a number of other times, and it's worked, which has been amazing.
Would you say that is, because a lot of those books written back in the early 1900s, Science of Getting Rich,
Napoleon Hill,
exactly. That was that part of that new age or that new belief type of system. A lot of people nowadays talk about that stuff, law of attraction. Would you consider that what a lot of people consider the law of attraction, or do you maybe not necessarily believe that that's the terminology for it, but the basis behind the belief of the law of attraction.
Yeah. It's definitely law of attraction. But let me be clear on this. This isn't about putting an idea in your mind and contemplating the result, because an idea and contemplation is like, I don't know, it's like a fantasy. It's like dreaming. It's thought, contemplation, and crazy action, right? Moving, if we look at the path, we talk about the path. If we look at the path, it's going down the path. So it's not, you can't dream and get to the end of the path.
Mm-hmm.
You can only get down the end of the path by physically moving. So ultimately, that is the answer. It's not, I think there's a lot of fantasies out there that you put an idea in your mind and you throw it out there and it comes. I think all the work, when we go back to my Costa Rica story, I think all the work I did to get myself to where I am, and even the work I did between the time I wrote it and the phone calls that started coming in and the negotiation, the drop out of the deal and everything else, I was so focused on that number, that my 5-year number that I even thought at that point in 5 years it might be a crazy number, but I kept really looking at it and going, I'm going to get there. And I got there. Got there in 6 months, 7 months, as opposed to 5 years. But wow, it was mind shattering. And, I can really say, I'm proof that it does happen.
Right.
And I've done it multiple times. I mean, I can go back to the story where I locked myself in my office for a weekend and contemplated and pushed and, the action behind that and getting the deal and turning my company from, I think I told you it was like $500,000 in the red to over $1 million in the black.
Right.
In 1 year, less than a year.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do it, but there's action behind it. I think that's really the biggest part of using. I don't necessarily use the law of attraction, but I guess that there is it is a magnetic type of pull, and I guess what it does is actually drives you to your goal. If you put it out there and create the action behind it.
Yeah, well, I think the belief that I think a lot of people, when they think of the law of attraction, is like attracts like. The universe will provide you the things that you ask for.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, and it's my belief as well, is that you need to put forth the effort. It's not just a thought. You can't just daydream it or imagine. You have to imagine something that has some kind of a goal.
Yeah.
It's not the universe providing those things for you. I think when you create a goal, when you create that idea in your head and you're working for it, the things that have been happening along the side in your peripheral vision now start to make themselves become evident in getting to that end result and in following that path to that destiny that you're looking for, that end result that you're looking for. So it's not that the universe just automatically provides it. Those things have always been around, but now that you're focused on something so specifically and believe in it so much, that those things start to appear.
Right.
It brings me back to one of the things that you mentioned on last week's episode. We were talking about some of the prior failures that you had,
right,
but also the things that you learned during that process. So when you started NHA in the beginning, there were some things that you looked at that were like, they stood out as like, okay, this reminds me of the past and how can I navigate around this so I don't make the same mistakes, but now I'm going to follow the formula that I know works. Is there a formula?
Well, I guess I can go back, like the sentence before you talked about was, what did I learn from the past? So one of the things I learned from the past is when I sold NHA, it was one of the things that was really unique about the company is that we had all of our client base didn't even represent not one of our clients represent even as high as like 4% of our business. So we had a vast amount of clients, which made the company much more valuable because, you lose a customer here or you lose a customer there, it means nothing. It's a very small percentage. To go back in my past, I went through a business that failed that we had one major customer. And as a matter of fact, that customer was going to buy us. And we lost the deal. Not only did we end up losing the deal that they backed out of, we actually lost our only customer. So we went out of business. So I learned from something that happened, maybe 20 years before the sale of NHA. That happened because I had all my eggs in one basket, one business, one customer. We had more customers. And the story of that was we had more customers, but when this customer approached us in buying and that they wanted us to be solely kind of committed to them, we did it with a thought that we would sell, and that was the goal. And we got, 11th hour got screwed. But it really did come from, I'm going to create a business now that has so many customers that no one could take this away from me. No one could, I understood my mistakes. I understood what I did wrong, and I moved on. I mean, and that being important. So hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, no, you did. Because I mean, it's you made that comment last week about kind of following the formula that you knew worked based off of, things that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Or that didn't work out before. It's interesting because I think there's probably a lot of small businesses out there or small companies, maybe one-man businesses or solo entrepreneurs and so forth,
Sure,
that may be sitting in a similar type of situation where they have a handful of clients, but if they lose one of those clients or a couple of them, their business is going to be, they're screwed. What is, one of the ways that you found that seems to be a way to circumvent that for a business that's sitting there that's slowly becoming successful, but is sitting there right at that precipice where if they do lose something, they're going to really struggle. And then what's the next step? How do you start to prevent that? Are there some small things that you can do in the beginning besides just going out there and hustling to get new clients that can help, prevent, that?
Yeah. I guess my answer to that would be very paranoid.
Yeah.
Be very paranoid about having one client. It's okay in the beginning. Obviously, you need one to start the engine running, but be very paranoid about that. If your goal is to build a sustainable business that you could sell, that's a whole nother thing, right? Because there are lifestyle businesses, and I know companies that do very well with someone in a supply industry that's selling to the U.S. military, and that's their only client. Those are great businesses to have, but you got to realize that if you do lose that contract or whatever, unless it's in stone that you're gonna keep that business, you don't really have something. Well, you don't have something sellable. You have something that can make money for you. It could be a lifestyle business. I mean, we see it even in the venture capital world. There's companies that come to us and pitch us, much like Shark Tank type of scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of these businesses that come in and you're like, they're not big enough for us to invest in.
Mm-hmm.
We want, 15, 30 times return in our head, at least, to even think about it. If we could imagine a 20 times return, that's going to be the company we're going to invest in. But when somebody comes to us with, and we don't really see them as much because we screen them more now, but early on, my experience is always that, companies would approach with such a small, customer base. If they have a plan, we'll listen. If they have a plan to how they're going to change that, grow it, that's great. Because again, we go back to the scaling scenario, right? I don't believe that a company first of all, company early stage shouldn't be always looking for money. They should start with a business model that they're producing dollars first. So they don't need that. When they want to grow and they start adding customers and clients, then you could start looking at that as a step to start going out and raising money. So ultimately, to answer your question, the easiest way to describe it is paranoid. I don't want to go through having one company, all my eggs in one basket. If they go out of business or they wake up in the morning and decide they want to change vendors or whatever the scenario is, you can lose that business. So create it, build it. It's okay to start with one client. Look to figure out how you can do more, unless you got a solid deal. And ultimately stay with that. I talked about the tiger biting your butt. Let the tiger keep biting your butt and realize I gotta increase my client base. So that's probably the best example I can give you.
It's interesting that you say that, because I going back to beliefs, I don't want to use the word law of attraction, but let's just use that.
I won't, but you can.
So, one of the big things when it comes down to beliefs and, the law of attraction and thinking certain ways, some people might be out there saying, well, you're saying to be paranoid, you're saying to be worried. How do you define the line between paranoia to prevent problems compared to worrying or negative thoughts for no reason other than just creating these things that could possibly happen? What's the line that differentiates those two?
Boy, let me think about this for a sec. The law, so stopping feeling overwhelmed, is that what you're asking?
Well, like you said, the answer to when you have just one client or one or two clients that you could possibly lose, the best way to move forward with that is to feel, have that paranoia, like, listen, I need to make sure that we're making the right steps. But where's the line drawn between paranoia for progress as compared to paranoia because of negative thinking or just analysis paralysis?
Yeah. Negative thinking certainly could cause gridlock and make you not move in a certain direction. But positive problem solving is a way of being able to move forward. Don't be, again, the road less traveled talks about, driving, dealing with problems, welcoming problems, right? I said earlier, problems are the price of progress. Problems are what life has its meaning in. So when you sit there and go, I got one customer and I really need to grow it, there's my problem I need to solve. And it's not like, be scared. I mean, when I say being paranoid, I don't mean it in a sense of, walking around in a paranoia state. For lack of a better word, it's probably more of, a constant feeling, nagging feeling that you need to grow this business and you need to be able to diversify where you are as far as customers are concerned, not diversify your offerings. Maybe it is, but ultimately it's about, diversifying your customer base and be able to grow that. Again, if that's your goal, is to grow a sustainable business that you could sell, there is the point. Going back to your, the line being drawn in, fear is horrible, right? You don't want to be in a fear state. You want to be in a state where you have a problem and you want to solve it. You want to build on it. You want to grow it. You want to use it as a tool. I always said, learn from people. I've learned a lot of my life from people's mistakes. That was my mistake. So hopefully some of you will learn that, putting it all in one basket just doesn't doesn't help you sleep well at night, for sure.
Right. Do you think because you have a very strong philosophy on building a business with a purpose and also having a story behind that?
Yeah.
Do you think that for some smaller companies that could potentially reach that point in the road where it's like, hey, I just lost this. What do I do now? Do you think by knowing the purpose of the company that you're building will help you push forward, through that?
Yeah. And again, being a purpose-driven entrepreneur, I think there's no doubt that you got to find a purpose around the business. And I don't really care what that purpose is, but it should mean something to you. And whether it's, again, if you're just selling widgets, you better find a purpose behind those widgets. Doesn't mean that the widgets themselves are a purpose. Maybe it's something with your employee base. But yes, building something, creating, here's the point. Entrepreneurs are creatives. They're creative people. They have a sense that, one of the things I was just listening to recently is that, we are, and I'm not going to get religious on you, it's more spiritual, but we have a purpose in this life. If you read the Bible and you look back you look back at some of the things that were written, God is this creating force, and whatever you call it up there, whether it's the power, the force, whether it's God, it's a creating force that actually creates things. And we, as human beings, are a resource or an image based around that. It's something inherent in all of us, kind of an inseparable element that's in us that continually wants us to create. And I think humans have to kind of take that inheritance that we have and use it. And so for me, we as entrepreneurs and creative people in the arts and acting and film and sculpting and you name it, painting, photography. All these things are creative resources that we were meant to do. So, there's and being creative creates the reason we're creative is because there's a purpose. There's a purpose behind everything. So we really need to find our purpose in the business, and whether that's some type of purpose you give to your employees, or is that a purpose-driven business? For me, it was NHA, which was increasing the healthcare world by lowering patient issues, even accidental deaths in hospitals, which is sky high and probably higher in the past than it's been in the future and recent due to bacterial infections and things like that we've been able to, but there's always something creeping up. So we learned that there are so many problems to solve in a business, and so NHA was that for me. Getting to the behavioral health market where I am now with two companies, it was all about mental health and specifically mental health for children and how to combat that, and really dealing with suicide and so forth. These were easy things to find my purpose in.
Right.
But there are directions. You talked about stories. My story is my grandmother's story that I talked about with the blood draw. My other story, unfortunately, was the death of my brother via suicide, which I took up as a behavioral health when that world was presented for me to get into. I thought, wow, I'm going to go in there and change it. And I have me and my partners in those two businesses. So. There's always been a purpose around what I've done and what I'm going to do in the future. And a story.
Right. Now, take a step back to what you said before when you talk about, God, a higher power, or spirituality, a higher calling, I guess you can say.
Yeah.
Do you think that, like you said, all people inherently want to create in some sort of a way? When we're very young, we have dreams of being, astronauts or professional baseball player, whatever it might be. And as time goes on, you either talk yourself out of that or people talk you out of those dreams and those goals and so forth. Do you think that the creative calling is stronger for entrepreneurs, and that's why we want to push through? Sometimes we won't listen to the more solid advice to follow that other path, the
Right.
easier path. Do you think that it's because entrepreneurs are called for a higher purpose, regardless of how spiritual you might
Right.
be?
Right.
That must play a big part in it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, whether it's entrepreneurs or some type of creative, there is an innate calling to do something different, to go down a certain path. Yeah, for sure. I mean, for sure, there's something there in our how we're wired, that does make that happen. And again, the question always is are entrepreneurs created, or are they kind of like, hatched?
Mm.
We came out of the womb and we're going to be entrepreneurs. I don't know that question. I guess it's all about how life, what you have in life. I think some of it has to do with, how you grew up. My dad was very entrepreneurial. So I learned that, hey, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Didn't necessarily want to go down his road. His road was rough.
Mm.
But he kind of created his own road, but ultimately, so ultimately, whether entrepreneur is born or creates on their own, I think it's probably more the life experiences that people have that make them want to be entrepreneurs. But there's a creative element there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an ability to be able to kind of have the ability to get up off the ground, after getting knocked down. I mean, I've been to boxing matches. I was, always been a boxing fan, a fighting fan. And to see somebody get knocked down and get back up and win, or the quarterback to throw, 2 interceptions in the first half of a game, and then the second half they break records and throw 4 touchdown passes and win the game. Those are the people that could get up off the floor. So there is an ability to be able to kind of shake off all the stuff that happened to you. But whether they're born or whether their life experiences, nature or nurture, is a question. Hard to answer, but I would probably say it has a lot to do with nurture than just straight nature.
Gotcha. Yeah. Building a business on purpose. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that as well, because I think that is building a business off of purpose is creating a goal, I think, at the same time, because you're building it for a reason. You're building it, NHA was built because of the situation that you with your grandmother, and then finding out and then realizing, wow, he was taught on an orange 2 days before this.
Right.
Do you think that, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this question, when you figure out the purpose, does the purpose change? Does it start as something and then gradually expand as, let's just say, the universe provides you with the things that you didn't see before, but now we're starting to show up in the path because now you've set that? Does the purpose change and become larger, or is it always just one main goal?
Yeah, I like the question. Good question. And the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, not in every business, but yeah, absolutely, almost all. Yeah, the purpose does change. You don't wake up and go, I want to, solve hunger, right? And that's your only, and you go down that path solely in the beginning. when I got into the behavioral health world, of course, there was a purpose because I already experienced it with my brother, and we're dealing with suicide. So that was an easy one. But most of the time, purpose moves with pivoting.
Mm.
As you pivot, things get a little clearer. It's like, magnifying, what you're doing and kind of using the binoculars or the telescope and really kind of looking at it and go, I want to, wow, look what we're doing now. This can save people. In the beginning, I thought, okay, dealing with NHA and healthcare, I thought early was just about let's save patients. Let's not get people to get black and blue marks in their arm.
Mm.
I didn't know it could kill them. I didn't know that they can get infected. So then it went to the point where, wow, we want to save people. And then it actually even went further into we want to save healthcare workers who were, at the time were getting HIV, hepatitis from drawing blood because they weren't practicing. There was no real written laws and rules about drawing blood and, God forbid, sticking yourself with a needle. I remember once years ago in NHA, we were running these training classes in phlebotomy, which is drawing blood. And I remember the class finished, and by accident, there was a sharps container with a bag outside the sharps container. And I was walking out of my office, and I picked up the plastic bag and to put it into the sharps container, and I felt a tinge on my finger, and it was an open needle. Whoever was teaching that class, I don't remember who it was. It was almost 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But that scared the hell out of me because I had this needle I was bleeding, and I didn't know who it was from, whether it was actually used on someone to draw their blood, or was I going to get a disease?
Sure.
So that was actually the premise of me looking at, wow, we have to create techniques that people throwing things away. This was early in that business. People throwing things away need to understand how to throw them away and how to use sharps. So I actually created a whole new area of purpose. Was we're not going to let healthcare workers happen to what I did.
Right.
And I remember like going through this, and I felt maybe it was more in my head, but I felt sick a couple of days after. I thought, my God, did I get hepatitis or HIV from
Right,
this?
sure.
I didn't know. But it did bring in a whole new thought about creating a purpose around helping healthcare workers save themselves from themselves.
Right. So I guess a good way to say it is that when you're following the hidden path, the purpose becomes clear and reveals itself the further you go down.
Yeah.
The further you go down.
Yeah. The further you walk. Yeah. Further you go down the path, things become clearer.
Right.
We talked about it being, things being ambiguous. And as you go, as you move forward, things get a little clearer. It's like, it's kind of like walking in the desert and thinking you see water somewhere, and as you get closer, it's either mirage or it's going to be water.
Right. What would be maybe not the number one piece of advice, but what is some advice? Because it might not be just one thing that you would tell a person who says, I'm just in it to make money. I don't think I have a purpose. Or and maybe that's a little bit too negative. Maybe it's just, I'm trying to create a business, but I don't know if I have a purpose. It's just, I'm selling things and there's nothing really to it. Is there a way, a system or whatever it might be to start to figure out what is the purpose? Is it asking yourself certain questions? Is there a way to kind of figure that out? Or is that by figuring out your story first?
I think if you have a business and you haven't got to the point where you're looking at a purpose, I think you're, I don't want to be negative about it, but I think you're a little lazy. I think you should write down reasons for your existence. I think every person has a purpose, right? Maybe you start there. Maybe you start looking at yourself and going, do I have a purpose? What is my purpose? And then you go for the fact that, again, if it's widgets, literally if you're selling nuts and bolts, maybe there's a purpose around, we do safety. These nuts and bolts are used for, for cars or for trucks, helps people be safe on the road, whatever it is. You create the purpose. If you can't really see a purpose in some of these things, then you got to create a purpose. And creating a purpose is doing things which every business should do anyway, is highlight the light of the business. And maybe that's your employees. Maybe it's doing something for your employees, educating your employees, bringing them and then tell the story. Tell the story to the customer what you do for your employees, not in a braggadocious way, but in a purposeful way. Those are, you want to shine light on, and I guess, from a marketing standpoint of things, shining a light on something that you do does bring out your purpose. So years ago, there's a great story of, some people may have heard this, but bears repeating, from a marketing standpoint, years ago, I think it was Ogilvy, the advertising firm, went into Coors company. This is when Coors was lower on the totem pole of top beers. I don't know who the top one is now. I actually think I just heard it's Modelo. But anyway, back in the, I guess, 70s, one of the reps from Ogilvy went in and wanted to understand Coors, the process of creating Coors beer. So he said, take me, if I'm going to do a job of advertising and marketing for your company, I need to know how the sausage is made, right?
Right.
How the beer is made. And so they went through the process of, they take this, the hops and all the stuff, and they put it together, and it goes, and the water comes in, and, and he started asking questions, where do you get the hops from? And they explained, and they said, where does the water come from? Well, we pull the water from Colorado River, but we call it Rocky Mountain water. And he stopped him and said, okay, do you guys talk about this fresh spring water that you use? Well, the answer was, everybody uses water. He said, yeah, but you guys have Rocky Mountain spring water.
Right.
That one line, when Ogilvy, when the representative from Ogilvy took that, he brought that back to his office, and he created something about Rocky spring water, about, here's this nucleus of Coors beer, and they use Rocky Mountain spring water that's different than anyone else. And that became, this refreshing feeling of, there was a purpose behind this. We're using fresh water.
Right.
But Coors didn't get it until it was kind of, brought to them. But the reality is, all these companies have this special process or special thing that they do that does bring a purpose to the business. So I thought that was interesting, an interesting story about Coors, because that brought them very quickly after that, brought them right to number one.
Right.
From 12.
Yeah. And that was primarily caused because of somebody else asking a bunch of questions, them not even realizing how important that was, or how they could change an angle and so forth. Are there certain questions that you might be able to ask yourself to figure out your purpose? Or maybe even a better way to ask that question is, when a company's pitching you on investing, are there certain questions that you might ask to try to figure out, okay, I don't really think this company has a purpose yet. I think they do, but they don't know what it is. Are there certain questions that you might ask or would have them try to explore to figure out their purpose?
Yeah, I mean, you go from the beginning, you want to know about the entrepreneur. So for my investment criteria is really understanding about the entrepreneur, and then, looking at the entrepreneur's purpose, looking at the business purpose. Why does it mean something? So there are questions you ask, but mostly they're kind of like surface questions. Understand the entrepreneur better, understand the mission behind the business. Why'd you start the business? These are great questions to ask people because sometimes they stumble. And you can eliminate a lot from that. If you're going out to raise money, you've got to have those things in order. You got to have a basis around why you did something. If you're quoting a customer on a project or whatever, you better have a basis of why you came up with that number. There's so many times I get, whether it's people doing work at our house or whatever, they come up with a number and I'm like, give me your basis around why. And literally I want to understand the basis of the business and I want to know the purpose of the business. So, there are a lot of, it really depends on the situation, but there are a lot of prying questions you can get to. Yeah, I've sat in pitches where I go, this guy he just wants to have this business that makes money for him. When people tell me right up front what their end game is, my end game is to sell the business. That to me is a turnoff. I want to know their passion for the business first. You got to have passion. You got to wake up, piss and vinegar to want to make this business a success and change the world in your way. So I get turned off by those companies that don't. I don't necessarily have a specific question, but it's prying and it's kind of it goes around. What's your purpose? Why are you here? What's your background? What are some of the things that you've endured?
Right.
There's no better, more exciting thing for me is to meet someone that endured a lot and still standing, still smiling.
Right.
Yeah.
And does passion keep them standing or does purpose keep them standing?
It's both the same, right? For me, purpose and passion are, intertwined. It's both. I mean, when you have a purpose, you have passion. It's kind of like a tag that goes along with it.
Yeah, right.
And if you have passion, you have a purpose.
And what happens? What would you tell yourself if you started to lose that passion?
I think you got to discover more about yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you really need to sit down and do the work. One thing you're hearing from me in all this, it's about doing the tough stuff. It's about doing the work. If there is no success without doing the work, whether it's work on yourself, anywhere from a psychological to physical. I hit the gym and work out and train and run and do my rowing and weights and everything else. I do it because this is part of my purpose as a human being. I want to do the work. I want to do the work because I know if I do the work, eventually all the other things will come. Some things don't happen automatically.
Sure.
That's why that contemplation thing with action, they don't necessarily just kind of like, it doesn't always happen where 3 weeks, like my Costa Rica vacation, 3 weeks later things start happening, and then within 6 months I hit my number. It doesn't always happen that fast. I think if you look at what I did prior to that is all the work I put in.
Sure. Right.
So this thing seemed to have happened in a very quick nature, but it really didn't. It's probably based around a group of things that I did in the past, including all my failures. And there were a number of them.
Right.
But so those things don't always align, like they're just like floating around. You have to align them. You have to do the work to align them.
Right.
And that's and the answer to that is it's pure work, doing the work. Sometimes it's sitting with yourself, or bringing in a coach. Get to know yourself though. I think, when I talked about like, you got to learn things in life. And, when I started off this by saying, I'm constantly learning. The one thing you really need to learn, probably forget going outer space, forget going underwater. We need to learn more about ourselves. There's a majority, our brain cells. Like we only use a certain portion of our brain. What's going on with the rest?
Right.
Those are the things that's the in-depth part that we need to learn and understand. I've been through therapy. I'm not ashamed to say it. I've been through enough therapy to understand things about myself, and to push myself to get to acknowledge things and get better. But again, staying humble, understanding that I don't know it all. I've been through it where I've had success, and I thought, ooh, the next piece of success is going to happen quickly, and I got humbled very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Going into a new industry, even when I went into the behavioral health in the beginning, it was a struggle. It was a struggle to create a new business. So I'm talking 4 businesses that I've been involved in. How I was able to get out of one, sell one and go into the other. Got a little better at it with this, my 5th company right now. I call it my 5th company, my 5th company that's going to be successful as compared to the 3 or 4 that were failures prior. But, so you got to keep, you have to keep learning, you have to keep absorbing and moving forward.
Do you think, now that you say that and that you're constantly learning and constantly figuring out how to overcome, certain things and you've learned to overcome a lot of things, and there's things that you're still going to have to overcome as time goes on.
I want to. I look forward to it.
Right. Do you think that you now have enough knowledge, expertise, network of people? Do you think if you were to start a brand new business from scratch right now, what would be your confidence level of it being successful and not being a failure?
Well, yeah. So 3 years ago, I started a new business, right? And we're in the process of selling right now. So the reality is, I've done that. Yeah, I've gotten better. Definitely gotten better. You got to get better when you make the mistakes and you learn and you do some of the things you do right and you kind of copy that. There's a great book out. I don't remember who the author was, but what gets you to here, what got you to there doesn't necessarily get you to here, or what got you there doesn't get you to whatever. The fact of the matter is, what I'm trying to say is, not all the time that holds true. I stayed in the same industry, and we knew that there was a market for what we were doing, so it was a little easier to do. But experience does help you.
Sure.
But it doesn't guarantee you anything. Guarantees you zero.
Mm-hmm.
You got to put the time, the effort, the education, the learning, or you fall on your face.
Right. How, because this is something that's always, talked about is network, network yourself, get out there, let people know what you're doing or meet other people. When you go out and try to either network with new people that you meet or that you come in contact with, are there certain things that you're trying to do or trying to put together when you're putting that effort out there? And how important is that to growth? Because I like what you said before, and I think I'd like to expand on that a little bit about understanding ourselves. And I found that I've learned to understand things about myself by talking to other people and networking with other people and realizing, wow, that's a philosophy that I never really considered before, or that's something that I never really thought about, or that's an idea that I never considered. Do you network in different types of ways for different situations?
Network. To me, I didn't love networking. I didn't love going out there and talk. I don't like talking about myself that much, even though I'm doing it here on a podcast. But I and this was a little bit of your urging too. Is just to let's start talking about it. I wasn't necessarily, I did it because I had to do it.
Mm.
I didn't like sales either, but I had to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I had to get out there and I had to do it myself until I can, make things work and I can hire someone to take that sales hat off and do the things. My strength as an entrepreneur was strategy and marketing. A little bit. I always like to stay a little bit behind the scenes, but when I did get out into the world, especially with NHA, and I told my grandmother's story and why I created the business, that was like authentic. So I could be an extrovert doing that and talking about the business, not about myself, but about the business and why there was a purpose behind the business. That, like, when I talk about that, I'm not introverted anymore.
Sure.
But I didn't necessarily love selling. I had to kind of play with myself a little bit and thinking, oh boy, I'm gonna talk about the passion for what I have about the industry. And then it was easier for me. Every time I could talk about a passion, in the behavioral health space, when we are with a customer, I want to tell them the truth, why I got involved in this business. Do tell them a story about my brother. They understand, especially when we're talking to school district that we're doing business with or whatever. We want to discuss things. So networking, I guess, authentic networking is great. I just, I never liked going out to some of those things where, insurance guy, and I don't want to put down insurance people. Insurance guy gives me his card and, takes it out of his front pocket. Not interested. That stuff just makes me stay away. But ultimately, if an insurance guy told me about his life and told me about his world and everything else, I would consider doing business with him and his purpose. Not that he sells insurance.
Right.
So, I hope I answered that question well enough about networking. Yeah, I mean, you do. I wouldn't say networking, but talking to other people and understanding things, their philosophies about life, and really understanding people. I mean, I love that. I love one-on-ones. You and I, before this podcast, we sat down and had a cigar together and talked about life. To me, that's where the meaning is.
Yeah.
That's where the meaning is. And we talked about business, but we talked about life, and we intertwined, and that is great. But for me, sometimes the word networking means like, crack the whip. You got to get out there.
Right.
You gotta sell yourself, and that's not what you need to do.
So for other entrepreneurs out there that are either starting or just starting or trying to get to that next level, sharing more personal stories about either themselves or the business is going to have a much larger impact on a potential buyer, client, whatever it might be, or getting a new contract than just trying to sell the service.
Early on, you got to get out there, right? You got to sell, and that's what I did. I knocked on every door. I did everything. In the beginning, I tried to sell, and then I became more of a, hey, I'm going to tell the story. More I told the story, the better, and the easier it was to sell. It was the same thing. It was the problem. Faced the problem. I didn't like to sell, but once I was able to get out there and talk about my services and so forth, then there was an enlightenment that, hey, I'm going to tell the story. I'm going to get out there and I want to tell the story and talk about it. And if sales happens behind that, fine. But it wasn't like, I want to write your order, So that's my that's my philosophy about networking.
Earlier on, you mentioned that entrepreneurs can have problems or issues that arise, and you have to look into the different ways to be able to solve those problems to push forward. Do you think that it's more often than not that when an entrepreneur is facing a problem in their business and they're trying to figure out a solution, they may be asking the wrong questions to fix that? It's kind of like there's always a way to escape a hold when, in jiu-jitsu or something like that. You can always get out of it, is what most people say.
Right.
That's, the belief anyway. Do you think that a lot of times if an entrepreneur is struggling to figure out the answer to the problem, they're maybe asking the wrong questions or looking for a wrong solution? And how do you prevent that and try to look at it outside the box? Do you get outside feedback from somebody? Do you write down questions? What would be the process there?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in getting some opinions too. Of course, we don't live in a shell. We weren't built for shells, so we do need to get out there and communicate. Whether that's talking to a therapist, talking to a business coach, talking to your wife, talking to your significant other, whatever it is, you need to get some reality of how people look at you and how you actually reflect. And whether that's looking in the mirror, sometimes we create our own image, what we want to look like in the mirror, and that doesn't help. So sometimes it is. I mean, there are some of us like me that was able to kind of sit down and really be honest with myself. What am I doing wrong? Why are things not going the right way? Why is the business in a hole? Why am I going down the same path? I kept asking that question. I asked that question over and over again and kept going down the same, process of building. I talked about this earlier in an earlier podcast, but, building and then it falling apart. And it seemed to be a pattern for me. Why am I caught in this pattern? What are the things? I talked about my wife's family that were in their business and their just consistency of running their business. I wasn't being consistent. So I figured out you're not consistent. You're doing things haphazardly and you're not consistent. You're all over the place. Bring yourself in. Focus. There were, for me, it was a lot. Some of them were books, The Road Less Traveled, the Al Rice's book, the marketing book, Focus. It was even reading stuff like Good to Great by Jim Collins that kind of gave me a sense of what a leader should be. Well, if I can't govern myself, I can't be a leader. If I can't control my intentions, I cease to be a good leader.
Right.
So, we talked about that earlier too. Remember those 3 areas of success: feeling like you deserve it, having a little paranoia and insecurity, right? Going down the path, feeling you deserve something more, having insecurity, and then what I just mentioned, impulse control, being able to, stay focused. So you could feel like you deserve this. You could feel this anxiousness, tiger biting you in the butt. You got to move, but you also want to stay focused on the path.
Right,